This video is brought to you by Kines 370 Section BL04. Viewer discretion is advised.
Come in.
Hey, Coach.
Hi, Tim. How are you? I seen you've grown some muscle this summer.
Yeah, since it's my last year before high school football tryouts, I want to focus this year on getting bigger. I heard they want big guys on the team.
That isn't necessarily true, you know. Coaches take many factors into consideration when choosing a player.
Really? Like what?
Primary aspect I analyze when choosing my players are constraints.
What's that?
Well, constraints are limitations or barriers imposed to an individual that may lead to decreased or non-participation in an activity. According to Kendall Newell, our movements develop between organism, the environment, and the task at hand. This is where different types of constraints come in.
There are different constraints?
Yeah, constraints fall into three categories: individual, environmental, and task.
Well, what does that have to do with me making the team?
Well, as your coach, I think this information would contribute to your knowledge of the deliberation process. Based on your performance last year, I think we should talk about individual constraints first, so you can identify what you can use to your advantage as well as what can work against you. So tell me about your height and weight.
Okay, well, I'm 5'11 and 160 pounds.
I asked this because, in line with Newell, individual constraints are related to personal characteristics which fall under the categories of structural or functional. Apparently, structural constraints are related to the body's physical structure and tend to change slowly across the lifespan. The structural constraints I'm referring to are height, weight, and muscle mass. Keep in mind that fitness is also a structural constraint. Your strength, speed, and aerobic capacity may be very important to the coaches.
I'm still not the ideal weight to be a linebacker, though. Comparing to the players on the team this year, my physical structure probably won't get me on the team.
Don't be so pessimistic. Even if you don't have the ideal body to be linebacker, you do have the agility and coordination to try out for quarterback. You also have an advantage when it comes to functional constraints. These sort of restrictions are related to behavior function like personality, motivation, perceptual, and decision-making skills. You have the characteristics of a leader, you're a risk taker, very inspirational on the field, and you adjust very well to plays. Not many athletes can say that.
Thanks, Coach. I wasn't looking at it like that.
Remember, we still have task and environmental constraints too. We use these constraints to choose our plays, defensive and offensive players as well.
Tell me about task constraints first.
Task constraints relate to the goals and rules of the game that affect how different players move. According to an article by Gagan and Getchell, these constraints provide recognizable movement guidelines for skill performance. The goal of the offense is to avoid defenders in order to move the ball down the field and possess it in the opponent's end zone. But the goal of the defense is to prevent the opponent from bringing the ball into the end zone.
What about task constraints for specific positions?
Well, different positions have specific goals to achieve and rules to abide by. The quarterback is faced with the task of throwing the ball to receivers and must snap the ball before the play clock runs out. The receivers must catch the ball from the quarterback, and the running back receives the ball from a handoff. The linemen must protect the quarterback from defenders. All of these players can't move until the ball is snapped. These specific duties or tasks these players must do, and the rules in place determine how they move in the field.
How about the task constraints for defensive positions?
Well, defensive linemen try to get to the quarterback before the ball is thrown. Linebackers protect the middle of the field by tackling the running back and watching for a pass. And cornerbacks and safeties defend the receivers. Some general rules for the defense are no tackling by the face, mask, or collar, no interfering with the receiver before the ball is thrown, and no tackling the receiver if he is in a defenseless position. So as you can see, offense and defensive units work and move together in order to achieve a common task. But the tasks and rules that correspond to specific positions ultimately determine how an individual player moves.
I didn't realize the goals and rules of the game affected player movement so much. What about the third type of constraint?
Well, environmental constraints are those factors that are external to the individual, and these may be general or task specific. Gravity, temperature, and cultural factors are types of environmental constraints that may play a role in how an individual performs.
Wow, I didn't know there were so many constraints to consider.
Environmental conditions such as heat can place a lot of stress on an individual's body and affect an individual's ability to perform as well. You might experience heat cramps, heat exhaustion, or heat strokes. Hopefully you can endure all that. High school football is no joke.
So when playing football, are these the only environmental factors that can affect my performance?
No, I actually have another article. This one. According to another article I found by Keith Davids, a lack of social and familial support could either also affect your performance. For example, access to good coaching, sports science, support, training equipment, and facilities are also important. I think I coach you very well, so and you also have a supportive family, so the odds are in your favor if you ask my opinion.
Now that I know about these constraints, I can plan how to move accordingly.
Exactly. With this information, you can identify what personal restrictions and external limitations there are. Don't get intimidated by it because they can also provide channels for easier movements once you become familiar with them. Once you achieve that, your motor development will improve noticeably.
Great, thanks, Coach.
No problem.